Absolutely ages. This is Henry here for those people just listening. We've been mates for ages, like 20 odd years or so. Went to school together, northern lads. We're from Sheffield, but we were living together in London, I guess now about 8 years ago, in this flat, living together and cooking up lots of food, lots of meat, as you do, or as a lot of people did. And Ian decided he was gonna, go on a New Year health kick.
Yeah, that's exactly right. At the back end of 2014, I looked at myself in the mirror and I was carrying a little bit too much weight and my skin was a bit pasty and I was basically not living very healthily. So I decided, need to do something positive. So I thought, this vegetarian thing that I've heard about seems to be relatively positive and really healthy. I'll give that a whirl for a month or so, see how it goes. Here we are, 8.5 years later, full on vegan. And it's been the best decision ever.
I have to admit, I was not sold when Ian, first told me he was trying to cook vegan and going to do a month of vegan. But then we watched a film called Cowspiracy, which I'm sure you will have seen. And I was a staunch environmentalist and also looking for whatever my next career path was going to be, the next move I wanted to make in life, looking for something with a bit more purpose. And so when I saw Cowspiracy and realized that actually plant-based eating, vegan eating is also the best thing for the planet, I was just sold overnight. And actually, after going cold turkey, I found it pretty easy to keep up.
I think, obviously, Cowspiracy is one of the most important films we've watched, but also Earthlings. I remember watching that right at the beginning and just being traumatized by it, traumatized to the point of fundamentally changing my whole diet. It was like literally watching a horror film. It was really harrowing. So I think a collection of those two things together, and then realizing that, you actually feel quite light-footed and you feel really energetic. All three of those pillars of veganism have proven to be really, really important to sort of start the thing and to keep it going.
Did the health side, the feeling better, etc., did that come quickly, or did you have to kind of tweak and hone before you got those kind of purported benefits?
I think it happened pretty quickly, but I think it's I think anytime you change what you eat, you notice a difference in the way that your body performs. But I remember just a few days later feeling incredibly light and nimble and like my digestive system was having a rest, shall we say. Maybe because of the kind of very firm, complex, protein-rich meat I was eating before compared to like this basically just plant-based diet, which was a lot lighter on my gut. So I think it was quite quick, but I do think that, that doesn't mean that vegan eating is necessarily healthy. It can be just as unhealthy if you're just eating lots of fried food, lots of beige food. So I think initially it will come on quickly for people, and it did for us. But then when we're writing a cookbook and testing, 5 lasagnas a day, you can have the same impact of, feeling really tired and getting those lulls.
Yeah. Bob Dylan famously said the night is darkest right before the dawn, right? And I remember, in fact, I did this maybe a couple of weeks ago. I was like flicking through old photos in my camera roll, and old photos that were taken almost 9 years ago now. And I remember looking at my dinner, and it was just basically the massive steak, 2 eggs, and then a couple of spears of asparagus just in a pan. And that was my dinner. And I was kind of thinking, really not eating that many vegetables at all. And obviously vegetables are great because they're packed full of fibre and they're also really, really nutritious. So naturally, when you do go vegan and you cut out all that stuff and you start eating exclusively vegetables, then naturally you're going to feel a lot better. It really dawned on me the fact that my diet back in the day really wasn't very good.
Were you both fairly handy cooks before all of this started, before the veganism, etc.?
Yes, definitely. We were, even back then living in that flat, we would cook tasty dishes, had a pretty decent cookbook collection as well. So I remember I think they're all my books.
Yeah, but I think I had the Hawksmoor.
You had the Hawksmoor cookbook, didn't you? Yeah. But there would be like Jamie Oliver cookbooks in there. There was a Gordon Ramsay trip to Southeast Asia cookbook. There was Heston Blumenthal's home cookbook. Probably about 15 or 20 well-loved, well-used cookbooks.
Yeah.
And I think as we both lived and ate, we would probably make an event about what we were eating 2 or 3 times a week.
Right.
I think that's one of the best things that housemates can do together is cook together. I think if housemates don't cook together, then they rob themselves of the opportunity to like forge a real friendship together and have that kind of common ground. Both of us really enjoyed cooking for one another, and it was a lot of good fun.
Just from the cookbook collection alone, sounds like you're pretty foodies, well versed, etc. And I'm taken back to a friend of mine who was a chef, and debate always was had about veganism, and she was of the school of thought of like Anthony Bourdain and stuff like that. And I remember she gave me this book, and this book was I couldn't read it being vegan for very long, because it was all about sort of really delighting and taking great joy in eating everything that kind of moved on Earth, and it kind of obviously naturally put me off. And I was never that big of a foodie, but for you chaps who come from more of that kind of foodie background and were into that kind of thing, how difficult was that transition in making sure that you were kind of like cooking at the quality, the standard that you were kind of used to and you were aspiring to?
I think that was the whole reason for setting up Bosh. We found it was quite a journey. There was quite a learning curve to go on. You're coming from this place. You've been ardent cooks, and you've got your favourite dishes. So Ian would cook maybe a spaghetti bolognese, or he had his version of a roast dinner, or his version of a curry. I loved a lavish lasagna, or a Thai tom yum soup, which I think I'd perfected. This massaman curry that I would slow cook. There was a lamb rogan josh that I used to cook, where I would you actually get lamb bones from the butcher and use that. Like, that's how you would traditionally make a proper rogan josh. So you're going from having all of these dishes that you like to cook that involve meat to then this, I guess, black room where there's nothing and you can't see a single thing. So we both had to go on this journey of relearning how to cook, and that was when we realized there isn't enough information on this in the world.
Yeah,
you can cook delicious vegan food, but nobody knows that. There aren't good cookbooks out there really, other than just Isa Chandra Moskovich, I think is her name, or Isa, I think she says Isa. So there was a couple of good cookbooks, but there weren't enough. There wasn't enough information online. So I think really that difficulty that we experienced in relearning how to cook was the idea that shaped Bosh.
Because right at the beginning, if we look back 8 years ago, cookbook-wise and social media influencer-wise, there was an awful lot of frankly well-to-do women who were doing like really, really intricate salads with maybe some difficult ingredients, and it's the sort of food that's really tasty if you can make it and if you can get hold of the ingredients. But for the average person, and for the average man especially, it's really difficult to sort of get your head into that game. So what we came along, when Bosh came along, it was like we were veganising lasagnas, veganising burgers, veganising pies, just giving people plant-based versions of the food that they already love. And that's why I believe that we've experienced a degree of success in this industry, because the food that we make is food that people actually want to eat.
Yeah, 100%. And thinking back 8 years ago, I mean, obviously, in the grand scheme of things, not a great deal of time, but in the world of kind of the progression of that we've seen in sort of vegan food, vegan cooking, like you said, influencers and all kinds of different kind of sources of inspiration from a cooking standpoint, things have really changed over those 8 years. When you first started, as you mentioned, there wasn't necessarily the cookbooks, etc. And I take it there probably wasn't really the plant-based meat option wasn't really as prevalent, and perhaps the junk food market wasn't as big either. So do you think that kind of naturally led you to, well, actually, we've got to do all this ourselves. If we want all the things that we're used to eating and all those delicious cuisines, we're going to have to make them ourselves, and therefore we're going to have to devise them ourselves?
Definitely. I mean, so we couldn't eat fish and chips anymore, so we had to learn a recipe, and that involved tofu, of course. Tofu and nori, that recipe we now all know so well. You couldn't get a steak back then, so we had to work out how to make a steak out of seitan. That was a huge part of the driving force for us setting up Bosh, was trying to find that food we loved and recreate it. And what's been really interesting to see, if you get our cookbooks, for those people who have either followed us from the start, or maybe have all of our cookbooks, or maybe have a more recent one and the first one, you'll find the first one, we didn't really use any of these alternative meats because they didn't exist then. They weren't in shops. The only thing you'll find in Bosh, the cookbook number 1, is we do a lot of things with vegan sausages because they were in stores. And then moving forward through the books to like the most recent one, which we literally are calling meat, in that book, we can really celebrate all the options that are in shops now, and really give any meat eater a satisfying experience, because there's so much choice nowadays, and it's really nice to see that development through the cookbooks.
Yeah, it's also been nice to see how many different ways people are using like vegetables in, right? So you've got people like Derek Sarno, who took the king oyster mushroom and turned it into various things like pork chicken or slices of bacon, or even scallops, right? And then there's an awful lot of people who've been using mushrooms to blitz them into a mince, to turn them into, say, a spaghetti bolognese or a chili con carne. And I think even though the meat replacements have got really, really good, people's creativity with regular vegetables has got really, really good too. And so for those, so the book that we've just done, Meat, it's a really nice cross section, because you've got loads of vegetables in there that we've cooked creatively, but there's also lots of the meat replacements as well. So for anyone who's wondering what meat is actually about, that's kind of the split: 50-50 vegetables stroke meat alternatives.
I picked up a copy and obviously looked at the title, and my first thought was, what's happened to Bosh?
Yeah.
Like, have they had some like dramatic, like life-changing situation? Then thankfully, after the first page, I was like, oh no, it's all good, it's all good. But I thought the book is fantastic as a resource. And one of the things I particularly kind of loved was that you were teaching people to kind of make meat substitutes, as opposed to them just picking up, potentially overly processed versions of meat in the shops and so on and so forth. Do you think that's a concern for you, sort of, as veganism rises, about sort of educating folks that vegan doesn't necessarily equals healthy? There's more to it than that. There's more education that needs to be done, particularly when it comes to meat substitutes, because it's something that I sort of have a little reticence over, for fear of folks, maybe like yourselves, coming into it saying, I want to be healthy, trying these things, realizing that they're not, because they've pretty much existed on those things, and then reverted away. Is that a kind of concern for you? And is this book kind of almost a bit of an antidote to that?
I think that this book is a statement about our viewpoint on, shall we say, the protein evolution. And this is the evolution of us as humans, moving from having protein that came from animals through to having protein that came from plants. So we wanted to celebrate that in every way that it currently exists. And people are buying these alternative meats, and that's what we realize, is nobody is showing anyone how to cook with them. So let's at least show them how to get a good first experience. And I think we wanted to cover all bases. So we wanted to cover it whether you're buying these meat alts in shops, or whether you don't like the idea of meat alts, but you want to like use jackfruit or use maybe tofu or tempeh, show you how to flavor that really, really well. Or whether you, like you say, want to actually go and try making the seitan yourself. We wanted to have something in there for them too. The debate around ultra processed is really interesting. And we absolutely agree that it's really important that we should all be eating as many whole fruits and veggies as humanly possible. And a lot of these meat alts are the kind of thing you should have occasionally. It's not something you want to be necessarily eating every single day. But we do I think that there is more concern about it than there needs to be, right, in the general world. Someone we know really well, and that is very influential and well placed within the vegan scene, has told us that the phrase ultra processed and its kind of use as a term against vegan meat was actually planned and coined by the meat industry. And it has been very damaging. So whether you're looking at supermarket buyers buying food for supermarkets, whether you're looking, and this counts both in the UK actually and overseas, a lot of people are talking about ultra processed and the concern about ultra processed, and we get that, and we should all be wary of too much ultra processed food. But it's almost being used as a way to talk about vegan food being bad and vegan meat alts being bad, where actually they're still better than the alternative.
Yeah.
You know, so even whether you buy a patty made from soybeans or whether you buy, or pea protein, whether you buy a patty made from beef, they're both ultra processed, but the one made from pea protein is much better for the planet. It is inherently cleaner. It doesn't have any like traces of antibiotics or any of the things that would have come through that kind of meat ecosystem. So we would still prefer people go down the route of plant-based meats if you're talking about an alternative to regular meat.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit too much concern from what there actually needs to be. But the other problem that we do have to fight against is a lot of the plant-based meat on shelves is just quite cheap and quite poor quality. So then people try that meatball that they pick up in one of the supermarkets. It's an own label, and it just doesn't have the quality. And once they get a bad first taste of a vegan meat, they don't go back, and that's what they tell everyone. So I think we have a duty to both celebrate healthy plant-based eating to people, but also to let them know that a meat alt isn't inherently bad just because it was made in a factory, but you should look at the label and also be aware just how much of the stuff we eat on a daily basis is also processed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that answer, and I love that bit in the book where you sort of explained, here's some of these ingredients, the specifics that you might want to look out for this particular number, and I love the language that was used in there as well, where it's, you know, less often, you know, mostly I'm eating this, and I think that really just helps educate folks who may be a little kind of, you know, where do I begin with this? Because I'd imagine in your minds when you're writing this book was the non-vegan as well. I imagine that was quite important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will basically, that's kind of our company mantra. It's like our guiding, like our Northern Star is to put more plants on plates. And it doesn't matter whose plates that is. It could be someone who hasn't eaten meat ever in their life, someone who's been vegan from birth, or someone who is a stoic meat eater who has decided that they want to eat a little less meat because they've watched a documentary, or you know, their nephew has questioned how much meat they eat. So like we're basically there for everyone, and this book is actually there for everyone too.
Was this book particularly a technical challenge for you over perhaps some of the others? I'm just thinking from the top, you know, when I was reading the segments where you're explaining to folks how to replicate, you know, the red meat flavors and here's the kind of white meat flavors and so on. And that did make me think, I wonder if this was more of a technical challenge, because there's especially when you're 8 years out of eating meat. So,
Yeah.
you know, can we remember exactly what this tasted like? And you know, has our palate changed to where we think this is accurate, but maybe it's not so much anymore?
That's a really good question.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I would say it was technically a challenge, particularly thinking about all of the creative ways you can combine flavors, but without using too many chemicals, right? So what we didn't want to be doing is using, for example, some kind of natural flavoring. No one's going to have bacon flavor in their kitchen. So that means that we have to get that bacony flavor, but combining stuff that the regular person would either have in their kitchen or could buy in a supermarket. So I would say that was a challenge. Luckily, we've gotten pretty good at writing cookbooks now, so we've been doing them for quite a long time. We also have a team here as well. So, you know, Lily in particular on our team was awesome. Lily actually does eat meat, so she could provide that kind of mindful meat eater's perspective on flavour as well, which was good.
One thing that I think we've done quite successfully in this book is just using flavours that are associated with different meats. So, for instance, we have a Lebanese lamb flatbread. The lamb is tempeh, and the meaty, like the lamminess comes from mint jelly. Because mint jelly is the sort of thing that you would eat with lamb. And it's the same, we've got a whole chapter on seafood, and obviously we're using a lot of nori because it's like a bit fishy. There's quite a lot of, where we've got capers in there, there's lemon in there, because they're all things that you would associate with fish, And when it comes to things like beef, there's an ingredient that we're big fans of called Henderson's Relish, which is kind of like a vegan Worcester sauce, and it's kind of like really umami. It gives a colour as well, because obviously it's like thick and brown. And so that's kind of one of the ways that we have, shall we say, pulled the wool over people's eyes.
I love that concept of like association, thinking about the associated flavors. I think that's so important. Like often when I think about my non-vegan friends who've tried like maybe something simple like a burger.
Yes.
It's the kind of the relish and the kind of the tomato sauce and the lettuce that goes in it and the bun and all those kind of things. Like it's the combination, isn't it, that causes the kind of sense. This is a burger. This is sort of hit all the notes that I'd expect.
Totally. I think you can get away with a lot with a burger, actually, because of exactly what you just said. So maybe that's why the supermarkets are creating these quite cheap products, because they're assuming, well, if you put it in a sauce, you might get away with it. By the way, can I just say, I love your hoodie, Sea Shepherd. Very cool.
Thank you.
With big, chunky strings.
Yeah.
I think I need one of those.
Yeah, it's a solid hoodie.
Yeah. See, I've had it for years as well. They make really good quality hoodies. Sea
Do
Shepherd.
they? Yeah. Right, I need to get on their website.
And you've got that merch as well. You've got the Bloody Vegans podcast hat on.
That's
as
a
well.
hat.
This is for the company, Bloody Vegans Production.
Oh, right.
And then behind there's I don't know if you can see that.
No, we can't see it because we've just got your face and torso.
There's my
Very cool.
little friend too. So that was for folks who can't see, that is a skull that says Bloody Vegans Podcast, and a former guest who runs a company called Sutured Specimens, and she was into taxidermy, and then she went vegan. And didn't want to do that anymore, so she started making all these kind of like creations out. But the beauty of it was she could make kind of creatures that never existed.
Nice.
And so she still does taxidermy, but kind of vegan taxidermy.
Wow, that's very cool.
Art.
Yeah.
Yeah, super like niche. When I got the email saying, "Would you like to speak to a vegan taxidermist?" I was like, "Huh?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?" But her creations are amazing. Anyway, is there some recipes that really have stood out for you as favourites, and maybe some that actually you were quite glad to see the back of and to get into the book and get them developed finally?
There's a couple of ones in there that were difficult. Like, but actually, Henry's just flicked through the book, and there's one here which was particularly annoying. It was the pork belly. And we're basically taking pork belly and taking strips of tofu and then getting a layer of fat in there, baking it, and then frying it off. It looks amazing, and actually the flavour and the texture is fantastic too. So there are a couple of recipes like that where they're kind of, projects. It's almost like it will take you a couple of hours to do, but you'll feel very satisfied when you get around to doing it. But we wanted to balance it out, so you'd have maybe 20% of the recipes that are a bit more quirky, and then the rest of the recipes are actually relatively simple and easy to cook. Again, it's the sort of book that you actually want to just pop down on your counter at home and think, I'm going to cook something out of this book tonight for my dinner, and that's what this book does too.
Yeah, we mentioned the Lebanese style lamb flatbreads. Now, obviously, we're not using lamb, so we're using tempeh here.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things about tempeh and tofu is still people don't get how to use them and how to make them taste great. So really celebrating the flavours that go along with the lamb. As Ian said, we've got the mint sauce. That was a really important one for us to get right. I guess we also delved into our pasts. So the favourite dishes we used to love to eat. So this is the Iskender kebab. That is like an incredibly tomatoey, messy kebab. Absolutely delicious. And that was from when we used to live, or I don't even think you lived in that flat then, but I lived on Upper Street, and I would always go to Gallipoli, which is this Turkish restaurant in, on Upper Street. I think they actually have 3 restaurants within about 10 doors of each other. So they have Gallipoli 1, Gallipoli 2, and then Gallipoli again. They've just got 3 restaurants basically all next to each other. And they have this Iskender kebab. Obviously, it's with lamb. That is absolutely banging. So that was another favourite of mine.
Yeah, but then there's some like really simple ones as well where we just went back to basics. For instance, Sarah's succulent sausage pasta is taking vegan sausages, breaking them up, frying them off, a little bit of vegan pesto, lots of nutritional yeast, salt, pepper, a little bit of pasta water, and then the pasta goes in there, fold it all through. Super quick, super simple, but really, really delicious and great texture because of that sausage.
Yeah,
so much good stuff in there. It's definitely our best book. I mean, at the beginning, if you rewind to the beginning of Bosh, we wrote that cookbook, Ian and I, and there was one other person working in the company. It was Kathy. We pretty much had to stop doing any social media videos and just focus on writing the cookbook. And it took us about probably 4 to 6 months, I'd say. Wow. Whereas now there's a good few people in the room here, you know, there's over 10 people working in Bosh now. So it means the videos can continue and the testing is much faster. We've got a team of people to help us with the testing. And we've just gotten much better at writing and thinking up recipes and testing and all of that good stuff. So I would definitely say it's our best book yet.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It sounds like it. I can't wait to get cracking on some of it.
Yeah, you need to.
I definitely will. I'm fascinated by the sort of the testing process. Do you at any point do you have an opportunity to put it in the hands of some folks who, you know, regular public, if you like, sort of civilians in the cooking world, and see how they get on with it?
We should do. We should. We do that internally. So we have an internal taste test amongst the people here, and when we do have people visit the office, we'll taste test them with them too.
Nice.
And we also do a kind of democratic voting system where we get about 100 people to choose which recipes go in the book.
Oh, wow.
And we will also reach out to some of our super fans and get them to test some of the recipes from home. So there's a little bit of kind of fan participation, but not quite what you're talking about. And we do know someone who does do that.
Yeah, Anna-Lena. We've just last week we were in Oslo. Because we were headlining the Oslo Vegetar Fest. So it's like the biggest vegan festival in Scandinavia. And it was awesome. But we were lucky enough to go for this really nice dinner after the show with Norway's biggest plant-based influencer, a lady called Anna-Lena.
Right.
And, I think you pronounce it Anna-Lena.
Anna-Lena. Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. I can't correct you.
Super lovely. She's got 2 cookbooks out, and considering Norway is a relatively small country, she sold loads of cookbooks to a very small country. But one thing that she did was she had like 100 families help her construct the book by basically she'd write a recipe, send it out to all these 100 families. They would taste it, they would cook it, they would give her feedback. She'd collate all the feedback and improve the recipe. So it was like a really collaborative project, and she's done it twice before. And even in the front of the book, there's all of these photographs of all of these families that helped her write the book. And it's a great idea because, you know, you're getting a real flavour for what actually works because so many people are actually cooking the dishes. So we should probably do something like that.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, I love that. I might check out Anna-Lena's, however you pronounce it, her books.
You
Sounds
should
awesome.
get her on the podcast as well.
Yeah, sure, actually. Yeah.
Are you going to write a cookbook?
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't cook well enough. You haven't tasted any of my food.
Fair enough.
I've got a lot of cookbooks. I've got a few of yours. I'm looking forward to Callum's when it comes out. He's been on the show a few times. I think
amazing.
You know Callum.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got quite a few vegan cookbooks, but how good I am at making the dishes, I don't know. But I keep, you know, God loves a trier. I keep having a crack. I've got a little vegan 5-year-old as well, and it's always good to get him involved with a cookbook. So
amazing. How was the process of thinking about his food? Because I've got a 6-month-old baby. We're just about to start weaning her. From her current diet of breast milk and plant-based formula.
Yeah,
start getting into some proper real foods. How was that journey?
Yeah, I'll be honest. It's interesting. So we've been vegan for only 2 years by that point. Because we're 7 years vegan now, and we were always like, well, he's going to be vegan, but suddenly the stakes are quite a bit higher. You know, when it's not just your health. And you sort of suddenly go back to all of the things that people had sort of challenged you on before, and you're like, so I think that's not true, Is it? Because now it's like, I really need to know
really
it's not
matters
true.
now.
Yeah, I really need to know that that's not true now, because there's a little person's life involved. So essentially, we just researched the hell out of everything until we were very, very satisfied with things, and it's been great. You know, he's super, all the vegan cliches. You know, he's very rarely ill, and he's super healthy, and
Oh wow,
So good.
growing like a weed, and he's doing fabulous. And he's at 5 years old, obviously he's a chatty little fellow, and he's a little activist in his own right. So he just says things how he sees it, you know. So
You should get him on the podcast.
yeah, if somebody's eating something that's that's made of animals, he's quite comfortable telling them.
Oh wow.
Very good.
That's so cool. Yeah, we are. I guess we're at the stage you were at 4.5 years ago. So we've written a lot of cookbooks, and we've put a nutrition section in many of them. And we also wrote a healthy cookbook where we really focused on both nutrition and getting like the right nutritional profile. But we're not nutritionists or dietitians, but we understand loosely what people should be eating, or at least what we eat and works well for us.
Yeah.
But as you say, when you've got a child in existence that you're feeding, the stakes are higher. So I'm now going back to check on, calcium, iodine, vitamin K, vitamin D, all these things you need to get right, and making sure it's good for her.
Yeah, we found actually the biggest challenge, as it is with us as vegan adults, is other people. You know, it's when you put them into social settings.
Yes.
It's the birthday parties, it's school, nursery. Those are all the places that we've had more challenge with, really, particularly school, because obviously, like with nursery, you're paying, so there's an element of you can call the shots a little bit more. Whereas with school, they have a sort of set menu and so on, and they were our school's really tiny little village school, and was a bit reluctant at the beginning, but quickly got there. Turning back to sort of veganism more broadly, we talked a little bit about the evolution of things. How do you see things kind of evolving from here? And I'm asking you to get the crystal ball out, I suppose, to some extent. But we talked, you mentioned about the backlash of like using the word ultra processed. It's really fascinating to hear that kind of being a meat industry derived term, and it makes perfect sense as you say it. And I feel like I've been suckered in, because I asked that question a lot about ultra processed food. But where do you think things will evolve? Where's the battle going to be won and lost, if you like?
It's a really good one, and it's a really good question. One that we talk about a lot here. Mm-hmm. We've had this lovely groundswell, which we've all contributed to, and where there's been lots of interest in vegan food, lots of growth in vegan food. And we've moved from a place where 7 years ago there was nothing, and now there's an abundance of options. But the conversation has changed, I'd say, in the last year or so. We've got a country in the UK, and in fact a world, that is quite focused on other things at the moment, like cost of living crisis, war, difficulty in getting staff, expensive freight. And there's just lots of difficulties happening in the world, and frankly, money markets that aren't performing very well, which is making people very nervous about investing in things. And you combine that with a load of vegan companies who've raised a lot of money at crazy valuations, and have kind of ridden a bit of a hype bubble. And what we're going to see, I think, over the next couple of years is a little bit of a consolidation phase where some companies sadly won't make it because they'll run out of cash. They won't get the sales. We will see, and we are seeing, stores and restaurants say, okay, so that vegan thing happened, but actually now we're going back to normal. So I think we'll see a little bit of a decline, and we'll hear some kind of negative sentiment. Just like the kind of that phrase ultra processed, which is easy to bandy around, and it sticks in people's mind. This idea of the vegan fad is over is something that some people will be saying. But what we're really confident about here at Bosh is that it ain't going nowhere, right? So we're going to have a couple of years where people will say that that's the case, but it just isn't. Like, the products are in stores. All restaurants now have options. People now understand worldwide that plant-based food is better for the planet. They also understand that it's better for your health. And they also understand that, frankly, what's happening in factory farms just isn't really acceptable anymore. So that is a paradigm shift that has happened in the last 5 years from which we cannot return. So, there might be a little bit of a kind of a consolidation phase, as we said, but we're going to continue to see growth in vegan food, vegan options, people going vegan, and people becoming flexitarian and having more vegan options. That's going to continue to grow, but we're going to hear lots of negative noise. So I think we've just got to stand steady, hold firm, stay true to what we know, and don't get dissuaded by public opinion.
Yeah. I mean, we're very much in the age of information, as we all know, right? And there is so much information out there now on how to cook plants tastily, right? There's no excuse. Whereas 7-8 years ago, the creator economy isn't quite what it is now. And I just feel that, you might see these companies that are selling nothing but plant-based meat fall by the wayside. And there might be some of the big players in the plant-based meat space just kind of get bigger because others are failing. But ultimately, I think people will continue to eat more plants because there's just so many more options out there. Better spices, better, more easily accessible mushrooms, for instance, and lots of different brains all working on how to make plants taste as delicious as possible. So I just think people will. Maybe the whole world's not going to go vegan. Maybe that's unrealistic. But I think one thing that will definitely happen is just that more people will be eating more plants, and that is a good thing.
And we're at the start of the innovation in this area, right? Nobody was really interested in developing tech for plant-based food 10 years ago. It wasn't an exciting place to invest money or time. So. And now it is, because we've proven that actually this is a more efficient way to eat. It's better for the planet. It tastes great. And it's better for our bodies. So we're going to see this continued investment, even if it slows a little bit, which means the landscape in 10 years will be completely different. Imagine what the burgers will taste like in 10 years, or the plant-based shrimps made from just pea protein. They're going to taste absolutely fantastic.
They really are.
What do you think?
Yeah, in my more optimistic moments, I think we're making sort of steady progress, and yes, we get buffeted by the odd kind of ultra processed kind of claim and things like that, and I always draw parallels with the smoking industry.
Yeah,
and it would there'd be various kind of things put out and studies and bits and pieces by the smoking industry, the tobacco industry at the time, to kind of make people think, oh, it's okay to carry on. And I feel like the meat industry's kind of got very similar parallels. So I think we'll kind of be buffeted a bit back and forth with that. But I think the progress ultimately will get there for all the reasons that we went vegan in the first place. I think the kind of the truth will out. Ultimately, with all this kind of stuff, I think it's hard to deny, and we're seeing. I think what does sort of trouble me, I think, is if we think something's with climate change particularly, and that was the reason I went into it. I used Cowspiracy, actually. I watched Cowspiracy, and overnight that was like that.
Yeah.
That things have got to change. I think if we rely on governments and institutions to make these changes for us, they simply won't, and so we have to take these kind of actions into our own hands, I think, as individuals, and at grassroots level kind of organise to kind of make these changes, because I think speaking to folks who speak to governments about plant-based kind of legislation, there's such a tremendous fear of losing any kind of vote by making half of it. Sounds like there is a lot of politicians who know what's right, but can't take that step because they don't want to lose their kind of votership.
Yes.
So I think we have to do that, and I'm encouraged that look at the amount of businesses like yourselves. My business, for example, is come out of veganism, and I think that's all of it is normalizing things, and all of it is changing things and bringing it into the dialogue of everyday people, and then there'll be a tipping point, I think, where it is then acceptable for a politician to put a plant-based treaty on a docket and it gets signed off.
Yeah,
but that may take some time.
It will, and it's so funny. I remember Barack Obama saying that making change in the US is like steering a giant cruise ship. You can't turn it too quickly, otherwise it'll just completely spin out of all control. And actually, we were in the House of Commons a couple of months ago at I guess a debate around carbon labelling, environmental labelling on foods. Sure. And there was one person there who was just constantly derailing the conversation by trying to take it to talk about wildlife diversity, loss of diversity, of habitat loss. So what we're talking about there, really what he was alluding to is he was a meat eater, and he was trying to allude to the fact that, yes, we can talk about how much carbon is involved in the creation of a piece of food. That is the best answer, by the way, for what we should be putting on labels, because it will just show, A, what it does to the planet, but B, it will illustrate to people that meat and animal products have a higher carbon footprint. But he kept derailing the conversation and trying to take it to habitat loss and biodiversity loss. The example he gave was, when you drive around in your car, there used to be loads of flies on the windscreen, and now there aren't, and that's because of pesticides. So you can start to see how that's like a logical thing for someone to say, maybe, but it completely confuses the issue away from one which is very clear and measurable, which is a carbon rating, a carbon score, and to one which is kind of almost impossible for us to measure, maybe is against monocropping, and so is a bit of a dig at giant fields of wheat, and is maybe he would ideally like there to just be, nice farms, permaculture farms that are, constantly cycling animals, and you've just got a few cows and then a few chickens and maybe some like plants that they can all feed off of, and it's lovely. But that would frankly not be able to sustain the United Kingdom and the amount of meat that we eat and the amount of food that we eat. So it's quite a hard point to discuss and quite a hard topic to get across. And there are a lot of people that think like that. And frankly, they think there are more important things than carbon, or maybe that we're confusing the issue by talking about carbon. But it just illustrates that there's a lot of people in this country who have a very different mindset and still do not understand that the best way to reduce our carbon footprint is to eat more plants.
Yeah, that one's sort of fascinating as well. It sounds like he's, I always use this, and I think I got this off George Monbiot. If you sort of go through on a train through sort of British landscape, it's a desert ultimately, because it's just large fields of the same crop, i.e. grass, used for pasture land. So from a biodiversity point of view, I would have argued, given the fact that we need a lot less land for the same amount of calories to grow kind of plant-based, we could then rewild and diversify more areas. It's sort of almost undoing his own argument.
Do you know what? I think there's a phrase, isn't there, in anti-racism, which is called whataboutery, which is just where you say "what about" multiple times to raise loads of different issues rather than focusing on the core issue at hand, which with Black Lives Matter, post George Floyd, it was, racism and anti-racism. And people say, well, what about this and what about that? It's like, okay, but we're not here to discuss that. That small issue you're talking about may also be an issue, but it doesn't distract from this much bigger issue. And I think what we're talking about is, look, we're facing an environmental crisis. It is carbon in the atmosphere that we need to fix. So why don't we start there? And then we can think about these smaller parts rather than talking about all the different issues we could solve and end up just doing nothing.
100%. I love that. I love the idea of carbon labelling. Although I think about my less positive. I think about the G27, the one in Scotland. You probably saw that environmental conference, and they were kind of serving like basically animal products, and then carbon labelling them, so they all had like the worst rating, but still serving them at a climate change conference, which was like,
that's quite odd, isn't it?
Why are we doing this?
Interesting.
That's it.
But I think I trust the public more with carbon labelling than I do with folks organising that conference. I think if you put that in front of most people, they'd probably they'd probably make better choices.
It gives them the opportunity to think and gives them the opportunity to make an informed decision because they have information. Where at the moment, average Tom, Dick, and Harry walking down the street, who maybe isn't as clued up as we have become, they just go and buy the stuff, and it's no fault of their own because there's no information on the packet that make them 100%. Think.
Well, do you know, just yesterday we were in a pub having a pub lunch, right? And by the way, there was an amazing vegan roast at the Marlborough in Richmond. So for anyone who's in London and pops down to Richmond Park, the Marlborough's vegan roast was incredible. Obviously now, pubs and restaurants in the UK print the calorie label. Yeah. Next to every dish. It was really interesting to see that the vegan roast, it was 800 or 900 calories, and then the chicken roast was nearly 2,000 calories.
Oh, wow.
So just from them putting that on the menu, if you're that way inclined, you're able to make a different decision based on the information you're given. But if you're not giving people the information about carbon footprint of their food, how can they make a decision based on it?
At some point, there'll be a tipping point where it becomes law, where you have to make that information available. Like, for instance, smoking kills. Or like, for instance, the alcohol content in whiskey or whatever. Having that information there gives people the opportunity to make the right decision, and currently that information isn't on the packaging, which is bad.
And I think like probably you, like us, you care about all three reasons, right? There's the health, there's the animals, and there's the environment, and there's also maybe the social justice side of eating vegan. And the animals is really important, but the problem with the animals is that is not an argument that we find, in our experience, carries well with the mainstream. Like, if someone isn't there, they just almost switch off the minute you start to talk about factory farming and the impact that we're having on, a pig's life or a chicken's life or a cow's life. So this really, frankly, these health or environmental based aspects of eating plant-based food are the thing we have to get right. And they're the most important driver of behavior change as we see it.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's almost like the law of large numbers. If all these people are happily eating meat, then it's easy for me to put up a wall to that and say, yeah, it's kind of cruel, but we've all decided we're going to do that, so it's fine. But yeah, when you've got sort of the impending kind of doom of climate change hanging over us, and that is very much part of the mainstream conversation, whether you watch like Spring Watch or whatever, or you're watching like a David Attenborough show or whatever. This is kind of in people's minds, but what necessarily hasn't, unless they're sort of moving in our circles, is the dots aren't necessarily being joined to say, well, actually, you can do something about that. That's in your hands, and you can do it 3 times a day. That's the bit, and I think that's the bit we're all sort of we're all trying to make the most of. And like you say, I think that's, in my experience, it probably, in conversations I've had with non-vegans, probably works better.
It does, doesn't it? I think people are inherently selfish. I don't mean to say bad things about the human race, but because individual people are great, but on mass,
together,
we act in a fairly selfish manner. And so the thing we care about most is kind of ourselves or our children. And the health aspect concerns ourselves, and the climate change aspect concerns the lives of our children and the world we're leaving behind. And there's only a few very switched on, very compassionate people who really can see that, like, this beauty of existence, shall we say, should be given to all the animals that live on the world as well. But a lot of people can't see that, so you have to go to them where they're at, which is thinking about their own health and thinking about the future of the planet.
Yeah,
love that. Where would folks, I'm sure most folks who are listening to a podcast called The Bloody Vegans know exactly who you are, where to find you. But for folks who don't know, where would they go and find out more about Bosh?
They can head over to bosh.tv on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And if they fancy getting themselves a cookbook, if you type in the word Bosh into Amazon or Waterstones or any kind of independent bookshop, you will likely find a copy of our book there too.
Also, we're going to be at Vegan Camp Out, by the way. So for people who don't know, there's this big festival it's going to be in Oxfordshire, Bicester,
Bicester, yeah.
in this summer, and we are going to be there, which will be very fun.
It's going to be good.
We'll be doing a talk, also DJing at the after party, signing a load of cookbooks, and just generally having fun for the whole weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be wicked.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure there's links in the show notes to all of the stuff we've mentioned. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate how busy you are, and it's great chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Nice one, bro.
You've been great.